You know who I am. I'm Paul Cox, and I was asked by the team to come in, do a little bit of training around signs of safety. Obviously, I'm not a social worker, and this is not something I've been trained to deliver in, but I've used it. I was thinking, how long have I been using signs of safety in practice? And it's at least 12 years. So it is a fundamental part of all child protection work. And so today I thought I would just roll out some basic stuff, some thinking about it, and some tools for you to use, because it really is a toolkit of different things. Some of you will have seen some of this stuff before, some of you won't. There is a shortish interlude when we can do a bit of a thinking around a case study, which some of you will be familiar with. So that's something I've kind of wanted to look at and see how it would work, just to look at one particular tool within this piece of work. Please ask questions. If there's anything you want to know, Sarah and Ree are here to kind of keep an eye on chat as much as anything else. So if I miss anything, because I'll only be able to see myself because I haven't set my screen up properly, and I will share. And when we go to Teams, I can't do that because I'm not the person who set the meeting up. Can you do that, Ree? Is it possible, or is it going to have to come?
What do you want me to do? Sorry.
If we go to rooms, if we break out to rooms, I don't think you can either, can you?
No, I can't.
No, that's fine. We might just.
Sorry, Paul.
We'll just we'll just adapt it. We'll just do it as a.
We're
as
only
a whole
small group, aren't we?
Yeah, we'll do it as a whole group. So I'm not gonna go around the room and say hello to everybody because that'll take too much of our time up, and we've only got an hour at the max. So let me see if my share will work. It did a minute ago. It probably won't now. Yep, there we go. Can we see that? Can you give me a shout back and say?
Yes, there it is, Paul.
Fab. Okay, so I've labelled it signs of safety awareness, and I think that's how I kind of see it. And I want to say I will share the slides with everyone. If there's anything in here you want to share with colleagues, staff, teams, I'm not sure there particularly will be, but we'll see how it goes. There may be things you want to pick out and share with other colleagues. So signs of safety is our go-to for, as many of you will know, for the child protection aspects, but it's also something that we use or can use throughout all of our work with children and families. And I think that's the important thing. It is a fundamental of starting to work and unpick situations with families. So I think why, for me, it is about this statement I've put on here, the importance of making any support we offer understandable and accessible. And I think quite often in practice, we know what we're talking about. We're part and parcel of a process, an involvement. We're part of a system, I guess, that we have understanding of where our place is, where we fit into that. And whenever a family encounter us or encounter that system, it can sometimes be scary and difficult and challenging and worrying. And I suppose the important thing about the principles around signs of safety is that it is to make it as accessible to people as possible from the very early stages, making parents and carers aware of and able to access and feel supported as much as anything else. I've put language that cares in here because that's one of our fundamental principles in North Somerset around how we address and think about, particularly our children in care. But broadly speaking, it's about how we address and talk about people in a general sense. If we use language that is derogatory or offensive, often those things come out in documentation and reports, and sometimes we have to be mindful that our reports, the things that we're being asked for, should reflect that consideration of how somebody else might interpret that and share that. So I'm thinking more over the things like the MASH checks I asked for, or MARAC checks, when you're sharing information with me, and then I'm sharing that information with the social worker. You should just consider how we represent that information. And it is about that partnership part. So as a bit of background, Signs of Safety Framework developed in Australia, as many of you will know, back in the 90s. And it was based around solution-focused therapy. And it is not just about the worries and concerns, it's also very much about strengths and considering safety based on what already exists quite often. it often is based around the risk assessment part of it, but we can use it at a very early stage in many different ways. So it's thinking about those things, balancing the safety and risk. It's thinking about being child friendly. And as you will know, because some of you will have seen this, there are many aspects to it that are very much about how we engage and can involve the child in understanding what's going on. Working in partnership as opposed to working against families. So we're building on the strengths they have and working with them. I think that's an interesting one because although we might have strong thoughts about how families work and operate as or function, let's say, particularly in relation to how they keep their children safe, they do understand their situation. They do have knowledge about their own situation that's valuable, and they are aware of those things quite often. Not always, but most of the time. And our value of transparency, being open and honest with people, and using that honesty as a way to promote a conversation. So those are some of the principles. We're going to look at various tools. First one is actually one that you should now be familiar with, which is the Let's Talk tool. Some of you might be encountering this for the first time. I'm not sure you should be. We've done a number of different little episodes of training talking about this, but this is our tool that we're trying to develop and use in North Somerset for colleagues in the community aspects of early help to be able to start building their knowledge and information. So looking at this as a piece of work, I have to say it's not mandatory. You don't have to use it, but I think it's a really useful starting place to start unpicking the things that you're seeing around families and what's going on for them. So in many ways, this is a document. And just before anybody's sort of not sure about this, it has only been available on a PDF version, but there is a Word version being released fairly soon, which will allow you to be able to kind of expand those boxes. I think this is a great starting point. I think it's a place for you if you're starting to work with a family and concerns have developed or understanding of those things. It's a place for which to start to record some of that information. Be transparent about it. Be open about it. It's a form that is for people to use and to see as much as anything else. The questions underneath the Let's Talk part on the left-hand side are optional. They're more prompts than anything else. They're to kind of give you some ideas about what you might think about using, what you think you might say in those circumstances. And I particularly like this because we know that we've been using lots of different templates and ways of doing this in the past, maybe the 3 houses model, all sorts of things. But I think this particular document is actually giving us a starting point for everybody. And it was the lack of consistency that was available to us as community partners. And if the history behind this is that when we had years ago access to the early help module, which was our way of recording stuff in the community around early help, we didn't need this. We didn't, because we'd used the early help module. I know that many of you in colleagues who would have remembered that would have worked in and used the children's centres to support that kind of approach. When the early help module was removed back into North Somerset, we were left in a bit of a kind of a vacuum of what we should do. And I think also the meaning of community early help was sort of lost a little bit within that scope. Emily needs to come in. Oh, she has come in. That's fine. So this is a really good starting place. There's an event on tomorrow, I believe, that is promoting that. And I don't know if at the end we wanted to mention anything about it because I can't remember the details of it, but it's at Foodworks. And it's designed really to start us all using this common language of community early help and using this Let's Talk toolkit. So there's a tool immediately for us to use at a very early stage. I think one thing I would also say is that, and you may have heard me say this before, but I used when I was supervising my colleagues in terms of in my school setting, I'd use the principles of science of safety as a supervision tool, and I'll come to it in a sec. But what we're worried about, what's working well, what needs to happen, it makes a really good position to do supervision, to sort of say unpick the things that your colleagues that you might be working with that might be troubling people. It's a forward planning tool. It also starts to operate on the strengths, the things that are happening in our workplace as well around that. So that was just a nod towards that. This is the second page of the Let's Talk toolkit, and again, it's building the plan aspects of it. So flipping from that into starting, and we're talking about starting points here for work with families. I always have used family trees or genograms at the start of my work with families to just understand the complexities that people have. And so I know many of you do this already, but if you don't, it's a really useful way of just grabbing an understanding of what's happening for that family at that time. Some of them can be really complex, and I'll show you a complex one in a minute. But for me, it's a document that is live. It's a document that will help you to understand who exists in this family's life, and also to look at the additional layers upon which you can build strengths. Now, I know that you're thinking, some of you may be thinking, gosh, this is social work stuff. Actually, it's not. It's the sort of stuff that helps us as practitioners working directly with families in the community to really know what's going on in a family, particularly if you've got a complex family, multiple children, multiple different adults in those children's lives. It gives some clarity, and it also, as I say, live, it means you can adapt it each time you meet with the parents. So genograms are really useful, and it's a good starting point, because if you're trying to explain your worries to a professional in the front door, for example, through a request for help or for support from early family well-being, if you've done a piece of work like this, you can attach that, because that also builds a picture and helps the person reading your information immediately to grasp it. And it doesn't have to be complex. Literally circles and squares with names in just helps us to think. This is a complex one. I thought I'd show it because I was Googling yesterday. I thought, give me a complex one. And it actually is one that North Somerset produced for training back in 2014. And it just shows you how you can build this, and how maybe as a social worker in social work practice would actually develop a much more intensive view of this. Some of the things that can be added on here, some of the additional bits can include unborn children, pregnancies, where domestic abuse is present, imprisonment, death. There's all sorts of variations on that. But I just put it on as an example of the extreme end, I guess, of family trees. And I tend to use the term family tree, particularly if I'm working with parents, because they need to understand what we're talking about. Genogram is a technical term. So a family tree, most people understand that. So I would encourage you, if you are beginning to kind of trying to understand or unpick a family, just to do a very basic one with them, just to sit down and get some understanding, something that they can access as well as you. So that's some thoughts about that at the start. These are the things you might be more familiar with. And this is the main templates of stuff that we would use. The 3 columns of what you're worried about, what's going well, what needs to happen next. That's a fairly consistent theme that you will see and we will use. And I'm sure when you've been to child protection conferences or child protection, case conferences or anything around child protection, you'll be aware that this is familiar to you and used frequently. We can use it, as I say, as an introductory tool to working with both parents and carers and children, as a way of beginning to establish what their worries are as well as what we might be worried about. And we can use the template there. But I think where I said be creative is that it doesn't have to look like this. It doesn't have to look like anything you can download off the internet. It can be as varied as what you feel would be appropriate. If you're thinking about a family with a particular leaning towards something that they're really interested in, I'm not saying Towie or Love Island or something like that. I'm thinking more about sport or I know we used the Doctor Who version of one of these for a child, and the parent liked it as well, so we used it for both of them. It just depends, but the main tenets remain the same. David Tennant, that is. What you're worried about, what's working well, and what needs to happen. They don't change, but it's how you create the imagery around that and fulfill those important bits inside. The fairies and wizards. Many of you will have seen this in child protection training, as well as in potentially in real life, and it's a way of using images to gather that information for children, but in a creative way. And as I say at the bottom, I have seen quite a lot of different versions of this since I've been in the front door. People sending in information where they've been asked to just speak to the child, and they've sent in lots of different variations on it. So it is a mapping process. It's a tool that we use, and it's that common language that we share throughout. Okay, these are just some of the big statements around harm. So around why we do risk assessment. So the harm and danger to children, core issues that bring child protection professionals into a family's life. It usually arises from adult behaviors and actions, but sometimes it's because of the child's or the adult or the teenager's risk-taking behavior. I quite like the next one, which is predicting child abuse. Is an inexact science, but it is and can be a really good predictor of the future, is looking at what's happened in the past. And I guess to best understand what's happening now is to be able to really have a clear view, a real understanding of what that means in terms of harm. And I think one of the main problems for us as practitioners is that we often get that sense, that feeling of something's not right, something's not going on here that feels okay, but we can't put it into words or articulate it. And often we're so busy that we don't have time to look back and reflect. And I think there is some value in building in some time, if you are a safeguarding lead, to just go, okay, we're worried about this family. We are worried about them. What do we actually have, and what do we know to be really worrying? And to do that, again, if you've been on training with me in the last few years, you will have seen this matrix. It's the harm analysis matrix. And it talks about the really simple principle of this. And I think, there's a lot of information on here that you think, okay, that's not for me. But actually, the simplest principle of this is the first, worst, and last principle, which is when was the first incident that we knew about? What was the one that worries us the most? And when was the most recent incident? And there, if you put those together, you're able to give yourself a time span, an understanding of how long and for how bad something has been going on. Instead of having that assumption or that thinking that you might know, this is a real way of actually picking down into that. So I think we're going to do an exercise now, but I don't know how it's going to work as a group, but we'll try and unpick it now when we come back into the group. This is from Holly, and many of you will remember Holly, the serious case review in North Somerset, and it's just the school version of this rather than anything else. And what I'm asking you to do, I'll jump to the next slide because I think it's been sent to you, but if not, I can put it back up. Is to think about reading it. Who are you most worried about? Looking at the family as a whole, what are you worried about? And then now you've identified worries, select one of the worries and see if you can find information to support your thinking about when the first incident was, when the worst incident was, and when the last incident or last occasion, and to whom. So who are you worried about? What are you worried about? And then thinking about first, worst, and last in practice. Okay, let's come out of this. Right, okay. I just hit my microphone, apologies. Have you all got access and sight of the role of the school information? Yep. Okay. Have a little think. I know some of you are working in a room together. Have a little think about first of all, the first question, which is was who, and the second bit, out of that information, it's a page and a half of information. The next question is, what are you worried about? So what specifically? And then we're going to see if we can do a first, worst, and last. I'll give you a couple of minutes to have a think about that. A minute or so to think about it. Then we'll talk about them through as a whole. I noticed that Ree's put in the chat about the Community Early Help Networking event tomorrow. Not that I guess any of you will have the opportunity to escape from your buildings because you'll be too busy with staffing levels, I expect, this time of the year. But I think the idea is to really embed this early help, community early help differentiation. Right, so I'll give you another minute.
Just while people are finishing off, we do actually have, I believe, Leanne Lovegrove from Daisy Chain, I believe, is representing the sector in terms of being there to outline how early help can work in earlier settings. So that'd be really, really good for her to be able to share, as she's got, a fair bit of experience of actually using those principles.
Yeah, I think the importance is that you, as a sector, remain on, at the forefront of those information sharing opportunities. Often in the past, as you know, and we've often talked about that early years gets left. It was really important to have a view and your say and your involvement with this. So we continue to campaign to make sure that you're included in all conversations. I think that's the important statement. Okay, let's think about and this is going to rely on you to say something, people. I know you're all nice and quiet, but it would be helpful if people could jump in. So who are we worried about here? There's a few named people here. Who are we worried about? Jump in and just shout out to me.
The children.
Okay.
Yeah, all of the children.
All of the children. Okay. Okay, so we've got 3 children, haven't we? Yeah. Just out of interest, and you can use your React symbols if you've got them on the screen. Just put your thumb up on your React button. How many of you are aware and have read the Holly Serious Case Review? It is a few years old now, but just out of interest. Is that thank you, Ashcombe. No worries. Yeah, okay. Good. If you haven't, it is still available on our website, our partnership website, and I just think it's probably the one that had most impact on over recent years in terms of practice and stuff like that. So it is worth having a look at. We have got some others that were unpublished in North Somerset, but it does remain on there. But it is useful because it does cover your sector a little bit, but not in terms of focusing too much on it. But I think it's just understanding some of the risks, particularly around neglect. Okay, so having said neglect, what else? What are we worried about? What specifics might we be worried about the piece of information I've given you?
non-attendance at school, 2.5-year-old or 2.5-year, just over 2-year-old lying in mother's arms, pale, small, non-responsive, parents looking immaculate and children looking neglected. It's a whole host of things.
Natalie, that was very good. Yeah, I think the interesting thing is that for me, that one of the things as a practitioner who worked in schools is how does a child become disenrolled from school, which probably can't happen, but that's just something I always wondered how that happened at the starting point of this. But anyway, that's by the by. Anything else anybody want to add? There's a really good points there.
I think for me, it's that the parents aren't allowing any other professionals to be involved with giving them support.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at the bigger picture. If I took a whole package of information, there is a lot of professional intervention, a lot of people around. It's just the way it creates an image, and I did that really deliberately because we work in silos. And what I mean by that is that we will often only have a view of what we know professionally. So one of the reasons for representing it just as a school perspective is that if school were the only people that thought they were involved, you would only have that very narrow view of what they see. It's only when you have that opportunity to come together multi-agency or to have those discussions that you then gain understanding of other people's perspectives. And I think that's really important because alone, this is just one piece of information about a family that have multiple other practitioners involved. So it's a really good point, Adele. Thank you. Okay, let's try a first, worst, and last. Anybody got a first incident that they're worried about, a worst incident, and a last incident that they would be worried about?
I think the first is that the non-attendance starts and they disenroll from school and disengage completely. That's the first sort of time they hit the radar.
Yep. How about a worst? What's the worst thing?
I think for me, it's when they go out to the house and the little girl is effectively non-mobile in her mother's arms and clearly unwell, and the home is grubby, the children are unkept, the parents aren't engaging.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Lucy. What about the last? In terms of the timescales you've got. Where's the most recent piece of information?
Would it be the school report, the schools feedback that the school have noted several issues were noted over the next few months, including parents' inconsistent effort to take the children to school, not being toilet trained, and being grubby and matted hair.
Yeah, perfect. So the reason why we did, thank you everyone, and it's alarm's going off here for 2 seconds. Bear with. It's actually 30 seconds early. No, 10 seconds early this morning. I live in a zone where it's not so noisy anymore. Bear with. It's just a Wednesday test. So I think the way to look at this is that there's some really obvious information here, really obvious. But unless you're able to kind of take that global view and get an understanding of timescales in particular, you just have a sense of something. So unless you sit down specifically and go, okay, I know this has been happening for a while, but just how long? And quite often when you're working with a family, time just flies through time and situations develop and move on. Unless you've got that very specific single incident that makes you go, oh God, I've got to get in touch with the front door because this is really serious. The majority of your work is long term. Majority of the worries you have are long term. They're going to be things that you pick up. And I know that just because the information I see when I'm looking at it, when you send it in through the front door, often there are timescales. Often there is a starting point which happened 2 years ago, and here we are today with a reason to share information with the front door, because all over that time you've had these niggling worries and stuff like that. So using first, worst, and last helps you to be really clear. And I think when I've talked to Dawn Newton, head of front door, who's wandering around here somewhere at the moment, she absolutely swears by this process, particularly if you're making referrals. Particularly if you want to say, I am really concerned about cumulative harm, cumulative neglect, or cumulative emotional abuse of these children, because over the last X time I have seen, we've had evidence of it, we've challenged parents about it, we've talked about these things. So it's a really useful way of thinking. And that tool, the matrix I showed you, there is a blank version which I'll send you. It talks about severity. If you want to go into those realms, do it. But I think its simplest way of looking at it is just, what am I worried about? If it's neglect, when did I first started noticing it? When was the worst incident? What happened there? And then where are we today? Is it still happening, or is that the reason why I'm considering it? I think sometimes we're just so busy that we don't have time to do that reflection. But if you can do it, it's really helpful, particularly if you are trying to say to someone, I'm worried about this, and I want you to understand why I'm worried about it. So it's a good way of communicating your worries into a written form, but also evidencing. And I don't like to use the word evidence strongly, but it is evidencing what you've seen and heard over time to enable someone else to get that picture. Remember, when you submit some information to the front door, that information is obviously usually just a snapshot of what's going on. So being as really clear as possible about what that looks like is essential. So I think it's a really good tool. I'm very invested in it because I've been talking about it for a while, but I also have used it and found it really helpful, just to clarify things. Anybody want to ask any questions about that? As I say, I will send you blank tools to go with this so that you have access to them. Yep. Okay. Let's go back to the share. We looked at that scenario, and so see if I can get my screen to work. This was another really important tool that we will use, and you will be familiar with, and you will have seen it in child protection conferences, often not necessarily represented like this, but this is kind of like a child or family friendly version. And scaling option is really important. So we would normally associate a question alongside scaling. When you put a referral into children's services, often it says, how bad do you think the situation is? How worried are you about the situation on the request for support form? The lower, this is the counterintuitive bit, the lower is obviously the more worried you are, the higher is less worried. I think it helps us to also understand the difference between us and parents. If you're saying, we've talked about all the stuff we talked about today, how worried are you? Using this kind of scale, and it's really clear because it says good and bad and okay. And if they're in 7s and 8s and you're 3s and 4s, you can see there's a big difference between you. And that's a conversation, it's an exploration, but it's also a recognition of whether they're able to assess their own worries. If they're in the 3s and 4s, they're worried about it as well. They get it, and that's a really strong area to work on. When you go to conference, you will probably see this on the wall now. Quite often they're putting it up on the wall, and those headings are still represented. But the subheadings, the 7 subhead, there are 7. The next steps is not a subheading, but the 7 subheadings of past harm, complicating factors, and danger statements all sit under that. What we're worried about, and it's unpicked by the conference chair, so they would unpick what those things look like in reality. Again, when we're thinking about past harm, we're thinking about what has happened in the past, what we know. Complicating factors, for us to unpick complicating factors, I think we're just thinking about the unknowns, the possible changes, the things that are going to make it more difficult to change stuff. I always give really simple examples like Dad is awaiting a potential court hearing, which could involve prison. If those kind of things, or there is There's all sorts of other things that could come into complicating factors. And danger statements are written usually by social workers, but they are agency bottom line. They're the point at which we're really saying, absolutely, this needs to happen because of this, because of the worries. Then we've got existing strengths and safety. So the things that we talk about, which will be the things that we can work with to try and promote that well-being and safety. And then the what needs to happen are goals and as I say, the family safety goals and possibly next steps. But this is our plan. And a scaling option. There's a lot of writing on there, but I just downloaded it because it sort of just, for me, it sort of, I think, helps to understand if you're working with this. If you were using those 3 house models, the what we're worried about, what's working well, what needs to happen yourself in a kind of one-to-one session, you wouldn't have all this extra writing, but you are thinking about what's happened, what's all these different questions that you could potentially ask people just to kind of unpick. I would say it probably overcomplicates things and it's easier to just be you. But I think ultimately those 3 main headings are so essential. Oh, actually, I've reached it. I've been really quick on this, actually, Ray. I didn't realize I was going to be quite so quick. I think it was the breakout that probably I was expecting to last a bit longer. So this is something else that you could potentially use, which is, again, something you could adapt yourself, depending on what you feel would be useful. It could be about safety. It could be about identifying good people, safe people in someone's life, understanding where those people could be that could help. And you can use it in a really simplistic way. So you can use it with children, you could have circles, you can have anything. So if we're talking about safe people, we're talking about family members, we're talking about how to build that picture. And sometimes it's helpful just to unpick with parents who they've got in their life that support them. And in terms of using some sort of visual diagram, it helps you, allied perhaps to the first thing I talked about, the family tree. It sort of gives you that connection to who they can rely on and who can support. And they could do it with children or with parents as well. So there's different things. So, as I say, I ran through that quite quickly. Ultimately, I think that the tools that are available in terms of signs of safety for us in the community have to be really simple. And yet, when you go to conference, they're exactly the same. You know, we're not talking about complex. We're not talking about complex stuff here. We're talking about actually very, very fundamental, simple stuff. It's often about how we, as practitioners, use those things to help people to kind of give us the information that helps us to support them. And I think whatever you use, and I do think sometimes we get a bit stuck on we have to do it this way. The principles, those 3 tenets, are universal. However you interpret those and however you adapt those is fine, whatever works for you. Even if you don't have a visual, even if you just ask the question, what's going well for you at the moment. People will struggle, if you've not done this with someone before, they will struggle to identify the strengths and the safety. And often we have to really work a bit harder in trying to do that. They'll know what they're worried about, and we'll know what they're worried about as well. At a very early level, at that community early help stage, a plan might just be, let's just meet up next week and have a coffee and see how things are. Or did you know about the parenting village? Or have you thought about signposting? I think sometimes we get a bit like, what's being asked by North Somerset, this is all complex stuff. It's actually not. It's very, very simplistic. Actually, what we're being asked to do is just to be that first rung on the ladder that people can latch onto to start signposting and getting an understanding of what there is out there. And by using some of these tools, particularly the early stuff, the early tools that I talked about, it will help you to start that process, to start understanding and unpicking things. And I use that word unpick a lot because I think that's what we're doing, is we're unpicking the situations that they're in, and they can be really complex. So we need simplistic tools to be able to do that. Okay, so any questions about that very quickly? People will be happy they got a bit of time back, but any questions? Anybody want to ask anything? I will send you the information of all the slides, but also the various tools, blank versions, so that if you want to use them, I signpost you towards our effective support document, which is our threshold guidance. If you haven't used it in the past, alongside that first worst last principle, if you're making a referral into the front door, it's a really useful way of joining the two together, because you can see that you've consulted the document and this area clearly is identified as an area that where you might need that support, where it might be beyond community early help into family wellbeing or into social work intervention. Any questions? No. Happy Wednesday, everybody, and it's nearly Christmas, so joy. Hope you all take really good care and look after yourselves. Rhea, or Sarah, did you want to say anything before we close down?
No, just thank you very much, Paul, for that, as always.
Thanks, guys, for coming on this morning. And as always, thank you for your feedback, intervention. When I'm asking for checks and information for those of you who've participated, always brilliant. In fact, comments just before we go, comments when we were having a meeting the other day, we talk about the real detail and real knowledge that colleagues from early years are providing in our MASH checks in particular. Real good knowledge, and it's really helpful because you get a sense of the child and the young person. And you'll know that I don't know if all of you heard, but we're using a slightly different form now that asks you a little bit more about the child. So if you've got any feedback on that, would be great. Thank you all. Yeah, thank you. Take good care of yourselves.